Behind a Mask. Is the name Dinah Elcott a reference to the author Louisa May Alcott? I wanted to check, so I picked a story at random and started reading. The first scene of Behind the Mask gave me a similar feeling to the one I got when I started reading Oranges, like I'm reading another rendition of Taylor's character. In this case, a 19th century English noble house is awaiting its new governess, a young Scottish maiden who's supposed to teach the adolescent music and literature, play the piano at the evening time, make tea, and so on. The nobles leave the new employee to find the house by herself after dark instead of sending a carriage to pick her up at the train station, and complain that she's late, even though she isn't. As soon as she arrives, she's bombarded with personal questions and demands, like playing the piano for them. The careful reader notices what isn't being said. There is no regard for her well-being, no show of hospitality. But she's clever and kind, and from the get-go, does her best. She's instantly likable. She plays the piano with skill and grace, but after a couple of minutes of playing, she faints. She apologizes and confesses that in her hurry to arrive on time, she forgot to eat, at which point the noble family shows a basic, underwhelming level of sympathy. The reader gets the picture. This is going to be an entire book that feels like Taylor at the meeting at school, the only difference being that she's described from the perspectives of other people. But then, as soon as the governess goes up to her room to rest, the author flips that impression on its head. Through her perspective, we see her taking off her wig, her false teeth, removing her makeup, and suddenly she seems more than 10 years older. Her expression changes, becomes bitter and hard. She becomes another person, and the reader realizes that everything we've seen so far has been an act. She's a malicious agent, a manipulator within the house. Most of the story describes the governess as seen by other people. One of the young men falls in love with her, and at one instance notices that she has been crying. He thinks she tries to hide it, but he is clever enough to see through her deception, while, in reality, that is exactly the impression that she wanted to create, to make him think that she has been crying and try to hide it. Every single thing that she does is read through the distrusting interpretation, even though the character through which we are seeing is completely trusting. This reminds me of the scene where Taylor talks to Danny in the morning after she fought Lung. Taylor believes him when he says that he slept through the night, but we know that he knows she's been out. In Behind a Mask, at least in the first half, we are always into distrusting interpretation, which creates these really interesting and unique scenes. The governess gives this killer monologue about how unfair it is that men keep falling in love with her and making her life miserable with their pursuits. And it's obviously something that the author herself felt deeply. But at the same time, the reader knows that she's manipulating that man into falling for her intentionally, and that the monologue is a part of that manipulation. It's like a boot camp in the distrusting interpretation. Consistent training, but very basic. The distrusting interpretation is always the correct one, at least until the twist comes. Worm takes this a level up by writing scenes in which the distrusting and the trusting interpretations could both be applied and be valid. We spoke before about how the battle over information is fought not just between the characters, but between the reader and the book as well. Similarly, as the characters struggle with whether or not to trust, the reader too is required to choose between the trusting and distrusting interpretation. And in some scenes, this is harder than others. One scene that was particularly hard is Danny's betrayal. Taylor arrives home to a sit-down she's scheduled with her dad. Danny waits for her in the kitchen, and as soon as she arrives, he asks her to sit and talk. She's exhausted after riding the dogs, getting beat up by Armsmaster at the banquet, and, most tiring of all, she just realized that she needs to decide whether she's going to betray the Undersiders or stick with them. So she tells Danny that she'd rather talk in the morning and goes to her room, only to find out that her door is locked. Before she realizes what's going on, Danny blocks the only exit with a chair, then sits on it, confining her to the kitchen. This is a statement. Danny communicates to Taylor that he doesn't trust her, that he isn't going to give her things. He intends to deny her things like freedom of movement until she gives him exactly what he wants. In this case, to talk. As a reader, you need to actively stop and imagine how much this hurts Taylor after being repeatedly traumatized specifically in that manner. The locker, the bathroom scene, the crying for a whole week scene are all echoed here. This is not literary analysis. This is just trying to understand what Taylor feels. Taylor narrates that she considers physical violence as an option, disqualifies it, but considers it. And I get it. Taylor feels like her dad is the bad guy here, while she is the good guy. Danny near instantly flipped that dynamic by telling her that he talked to the school, that he knows that she lied to him. She apologizes for skipping, but she can't make herself apologize for lying to him, which is worse. Lying to someone, having them walk around with false information, is a form of attack. Attacking someone who trusts you is betrayal. Taylor betrayed Danny first. And after that betrayal, Danny called his mother-in-law. We've seen his interlude, so we know how much he wants to call Annette herself every single day. Annette's mother was the best substitute he could get. And as a representative of authority, she told him to stop being Taylor's ally and become her parent. Note that she implies that those are mutually exclusive. Danny himself said that he would have told her off a week before, but after finding out that Taylor betrayed him, he found the application of power more palatable. Physically blocking someone's exit is an application of pure power. Even Bakuda is above that. Danny still obviously loves Taylor. He doesn't yell at her, he doesn't bombard her with questions, but he does tell her that they are going to sit there until she tells him what's going on. Taylor wants to rebuild the trust. She wants to tell him that she's a villain. She tries to write down an explanation, but doesn't find one that would make sense to her father. Both of them have different perspectives and they need to be merged in order for trust to exist. But Taylor can't find a way to merge the realities that will make it seem like her choice to join the Undersiders ever made sense. No matter what real story she told him, he would think that she was a shitty person. Maybe she was. She deluded herself, but she knows he won't be deluded, and she's not ready to admit to the both of them what she's actually done. So she texts Lisa, asking for help. A parallel of Aisha texting Brian or Amy texting Victoria, reaching out to an older sibling in a time of need. Taylor and Lisa are sisters now. But it's also a parallel of Taylor's mother dying because she was texting instead of looking at the road. Soon after, Lisa opens the door from the outside and Taylor uses Danny's surprise to escape. He grabs Taylor by the arm, an even clearer form of pure power, and when she wrenches her arm free, he appeals to authority. "I'm your parent," he says. "This is your home." Taylor simply explains that home is where you feel safe and leaves. And then Danny goes full cooperative, asking her to stay, promising that he would never lock the door again. I hate to do this to my man, but the trusting interpretation of Danny's behavior is that his main interest is Taylor's well-being. He wants to help. He needs to help. But unlike his namesake prophet, he can't help without knowing what the problem is. So he applies excessive force in order to find out, which is the first step towards saving his daughter for something that he knows is really bad. The distrusting interpretation... Do you remember what Danny felt in his interlude as he heard Taylor making herself a snack? It was rage, not a desperate need to help, but an anger directed at Taylor for not doing what he wanted. It was a need to apply power on her in order to get her to comply. When the school staff told him that he has no idea what's going on with his daughter, he was humiliated, in a similar way to how Brian was humiliated in the villains meetup when he found out that Rachel was acting out without his knowledge. Brian released some of his anger by grabbing Rachel by the throat and slamming her against the wall. But Danny isn't allowed to do that. He feels impotent, and there are few things more dangerous than people with power who see themselves as powerless. The distrusting interpretation of any character is about ego and power, and I would give my man the benefit of the doubt if it wasn't for when Danny regrets applying pure power. It's not when Taylor shows distress, it's not when she tells him how hard it is for her to have her trauma recreated by him, of all people. It's only after she wrenches her arm free, that is, she proves that she's too powerful to be controlled, that he expresses regret. It's only after pure power and authority fail that he appeals to trust. But that's not even my strongest piece of evidence. Just like with the school meeting, it's about what isn't being said. Danny demands that Taylor go back to school, where every single day she will either be humiliated or have her well-being eroded by the stress of waiting to be humiliated. If his main concern is Taylor's well-being, how come the fact that she's getting psychologically tortured on a daily basis doesn't come up once? I don't want to be too harsh on the guy. The way he addresses this is better than how most parents would. He fails, but I have no idea what is the correct thing to do when your child is a teenage supervillain. What I do know is that the difference between trust and power is in freedom. Power, in all of its different forms, limits freedom. Trust gives it. Lisa cements herself as the best girl by professing her trust in Taylor. Danny doesn't have any power over Lisa, so he applies trust as well, asking if she's okay with this. And Lisa responds, Taylor is smart. If she's decided she needs to get away and work stuff out for herself, I trust it's for good reason. And that's why Taylor chooses to be with Lisa, no homo. But maybe this isn't fair. Maybe Lisa knows that Taylor is smart and Danny doesn't. It's no coincidence that earlier in this very scene, Danny talks about how smart Taylor is, saying that he and her mother were considering whether or not to get her to skip a year because she was so smart. Danny convinced Annette that it would be better for Taylor to stay in the same year with her best friend at the time, Emma. This isn't just to show that he knows how smart Taylor is, it again cements that a decision can seem good when you have little information but reveal itself to be a bad one once you have more information, just like we're going to see when we meet Dinah for the first time. Taylor gets into Lisa's car and forces herself not to look back at her father, even though she really wants to. This might be a biblical reference, and it might not be. When Taylor uses a phrase like "as numerous as the stars in the sky," I can be confident that it's a reference because there isn't really another reason for a teenage girl to use that phrase. Taylor not looking back, the way she rips out a part of her own soul, breaks my fucking heart. So this bit might have been put there regardless of Genesis 11. In which, don't worry, this is going to be a short one, in which God tells Abraham that he's about to destroy the city of Sodom or Sodom, which you may have heard about. This is open to interpretation, but I get the feeling that God wants to destroy the city, not so much because anal sex is in fashion, but more because the city is in a state of societal collapse. Specifically, the people have no trust in one another. But Abraham has a nephew who lives in Sodom, Lot. So as the first ever Jew, Abraham does what my people are unjustly stereotyped for. He haggles. He argues with the power that created the universe, eventually arriving at a compromise. He'll be allowed to get Lot and his family out of Sodom on one condition. Under no circumstances will they look back at the city that they are leaving. They leave. But Lot's unnamed wife looks back and instantly turns into a pillar of salt. Lot keeps looking ahead, and so he gets to live. I can't believe they taught me in elementary school that the moral is that you should obey God to the letter, instead of the obvious moral that when you leave, you can't afford to look back. It's not just that you shouldn't look back. You won't be able to leave if you do. Taylor doesn't need God to warn her. She says that she'll come back, but she sure as hell isn't looking back. She chooses the undersiders, and so she doubles down on building trust with them. And her efforts start in... The dog shelter is one of the scenes that I remembered specifically because it was so boring on the first read. The reason it's boring is that even though the thematic and philosophical parts are just as deep as always, they're not supported by the more surface-level action and excitement. And as a superficially boring scene, it's probably the best example of how reading differently changes the experience. So, reading superficially, we see Taylor offering Rachel to help with her dogs, going as far as giving Rachel permission to hit her if Taylor pisses her off. We ended the last video by saying that Taylor, as the protagonist of this story, embodies its main message, that we must learn to see the perspectives of others, even if they've hurt us. Taylor is now trying to understand how to earn Rachel's trust, and she starts with the relatively safe strategy of taking on suffering so that Rachel will suffer less. In this case, shoveling dog shit so that Rachel will have to shovel less. Taylor plays with the dogs a little, and she hears their stories from Rachel. I'll focus on one bitch that had a shoulder injury that now hurts when she runs. She's of a breed that needs a lot of physical activity, and so she's in an impossible situation, full of energy but in pain, always lagging behind the other dogs when they chase a ball. The reader was already given the key to read this in Brutus's interlude, and they can use that key to get so much more out of the scene. To recall how crucial it was for Brutus not to lag behind the others, and how devastatingly vulnerable he was emotionally, going from the highest high to the lowest low in a second. There are dozens of dogs in the shelter, and each one of them has a story like that. Of course, the reader is also invited to contemplate the real-world implications of this. This is the reader's challenge that Taylor's challenge parallels. How much of reality will you allow yourself to perceive? What do you choose to block out? Taylor trains herself at taking more perspectives in, insectile, human, and canine. So, some white supremacists show up. It's not a very interesting fight because it lacks all of the things that made the fight with Bakura interesting. These characters come out of nowhere, they don't have an interesting power, and they are not really scary. But everything around the fighting is interesting. When Rachel talks to the supremacists, she's being level-headed. She reacts to the threats with logic, something that she's never done with the Undersiders. The reader might learn something about Rachel here, that her aggression towards the Undersiders doesn't come from a sense of danger. This is just how she feels she should communicate with her packmates. The supremacists are not her packmates, and against them she's actually being tactical. The supremacists themselves communicate something about the disadvantages of using ideology to control people, which is what Empire 88 does. When you give your minions an ideal of strength to follow, they are loyal to the ideal, not to you, and if the ideal is more violent than necessary, that might cause problems. Kaiser doesn't want his goons to attack the Undersiders. Before Taylor cut Lung's eyes out, Lung was just about to crush Kaiser, presumably to death. By defeating Lung, Taylor saved Kaiser. She gave him something, and by doing so, she hasn't established trust, but it would certainly look bad to attack her team after that. But Kaiser doesn't really control the goons, the Ideal does, and the Ideal guides them to attack the girl who's running a dog shelter near their base of operations. We also see another advantage of trust in this scene. Because Taylor is in a team with Lisa and Brian, they share trade secrets with her. When Taylor fights the supremacists, she uses two tricks: to create decoys and to lie about her powers, which she copies from Brian and Lisa, respectively. Telling the goons that she's transformed herself into bugs is a pretty Tattletale thing to do, and she would have never learned it if she wasn't on Tattletale's side during the bank robbery. Anyway, Taylor and Rachel scare the goons away, and Taylor has earned some of Rachel's trust by taking on a real risk in order to help her. And Rachel sees this. We know that because Rachel reciprocates that trust by giving Taylor dating advice. The advice is to tell Brian that she is down to fuck. This is not good advice, but it has a good element to it. Rachel advises Taylor to give Brian correct information and trust him to decide. What Taylor does is the opposite. She tricks him, and we can't really say that it works for her in the bookstore. We arrive at the climax, or anticlimax, of Taylor and Brian's relationship with a lot of momentum, after Taylor and Brian have been crushing on each other for pretty much the entirety of the book so far. Yes, I'm saying Brian crushes on Taylor too, and we are simply presented with too much proof before Leviathan to interpret it differently. But first, let's go through the events and interpret them as Taylor does. Brian and Taylor are taking the bus together when Taylor spots Sophia. Sophia doesn't even see Taylor because she's too busy drooling over Brian. It's kinda strange that the only reason for Sophia to be attracted to Brian is that they're both black and athletic, but whatever, man, nobody's perfect. Taylor asks Brian to kiss her in order for Sophia to see, and he does. The trusting interpretation... There's no trusting interpretation. Taylor is just being a dick. They get off the bus, split up. Sophia tries to pull Taylor's ear off with partial success and presents her philosophy, which we'll get back to later. Brian intervenes, Sophia fucks off, and in the aftershock, Taylor confesses to Brian. We've seen this in a lot of superhero movies. The whole fantasy is about escaping the depressing parts of high school, and it fits so well that Taylor's superpowers, the opportunity that the powers gave her to show what a good person she is, would be enough to get the boy she likes to like her back. But it doesn't. Saying that this is beautiful and I love it is not analysis. Analysis would be to try and understand why this is beautiful and why I love it so much. And the reason would be, again, that it feels real. It feels like what I've been through. Maybe you've been through the exact same experience, but even if you didn't, I think you'd agree that it feels more authentic than Spider-Man getting Mary Jane. If we're doing a comparative analysis, it's worth mentioning that the Kick-Ass comic ends with the protagonist's crush sending him a video of herself banging another dude, which is subversive but gross, unrelatable, and unhelpful. I felt catharsis with Taylor, and that my own experience was validated. Taylor needs to accept that her perspective wasn't aligned with Brian's. Taylor saw Brian and herself as a potential couple, while Brian saw her as a little sister. The way that Taylor deals with the pain of having Brian pity her and apologize is to communicate to him her perspective. She lists all of the evidence that made her think that he wants her. Before realizing that it's not helping her in any way, she trails off and thinks, "It had sounded like a stronger argument in my head than it did out loud, except what was I trying to argue? Was I trying to convince him that he liked me?" Yes, she does. And she is right. Let's look at the evidence. He does invite Taylor to help him with the furniture without inviting any of the others. He accidentally touches her, which I could believe to be accidental for anybody who isn't literally a ninja. But Brian, his entire personality is being careful. When she tells him she might have bad breath, he comes closer, letting her breathe out so he could breathe her in. An extremely intimate gesture. Girls, if a guy buys you something beautiful and expensive without any prompting, he might be into you or he might be a creep. But he's definitely not disinterested. If he offers to teach you grappling, apply judgment. The strongest proof is Lisa's approval. Teenage boys are not hard to read without superpowers. Lisa encourages Taylor to go for it with Brian, and she wouldn't just send her to crash and burn like that, right? There's a terrifying, distrusting interpretation here, but I don't like it. I'd rather believe that when Lisa told Taylor that relationships are hard to get off the ground without a healthy dose of self-delusion, she tried to warn Taylor that falling in love is a subcategory of madness. Lisa tells Taylor that Brian and her are the only ones who can't see what's going on, that Brutus probably picked up that they're becoming an item. Why is this important? First of all, Brutus might actually know that something is up. But more importantly, Brian has his ability to interpret reality hindered, just like Taylor does. Their falling in love makes sense. With Taylor, it's not hard to see why. Even if she wasn't a social outcast, teenage boys really don't need to do much to be attracted to straight teenage girls. If they are kind to people around them, seemingly confident, and have something that they actually care about, the rest is just being close enough to notice. A six-pack and high intelligence aren't necessary, but they help. Why does Brian crush on Taylor? First of all, we have no idea what she looks like. We read her narration, but she's a victim of sustained psychological abuse, and it's safe to assume she's even less fair to herself than the average teenage girl. But beyond that, people crush on people because some part of themselves recognizes a potential. In Brian's case, it's a potential for someone that he won't have to hide from. He doesn't trust Taylor enough to communicate that there might be a potential. She doesn't trust him either, so instead of talking to him, she steals the kiss. She asks him for help to deceive Sophia to think that Taylor is cooler than she actually is. You might think that he wasn't into it, that he was just being a bro, but if I ask one of my bros to kiss me on the bus, I promise you, I'm going to get a very different reaction from what Taylor got. Brian's glad to kiss her because he has an excuse. When asked, he could say that he took one for the team. But when she tells him that she likes him, he needs to choose whether to actually admit his feelings to her, and he chooses not to. Why? One reason is to not get hurt. The other, more important one, is to not hurt. Hear me out. Brian, like Taylor, like most people who grew up in an abusive environment, has a pretty horrible self-esteem. He sees how hard it is with people around him. He knows that there is something wrong with him, a hardness he can't soften. Brian protects everyone around him, and here he needs to choose whether or not to put Taylor in a place where, if we're being honest about teenage relationships, she's very likely to be hurt. To be hurt by him. Now, you might say, is this realistic for a 17-year-old to think about? Let me tell you a story. When I was 15, the same age as Taylor, I asked a girl out. She was smart and kind, and she had this dark sense of humor that I really liked. Also, she had these beautiful big blue eyes. It is what it is. But more than all of those, I think that even though she hit it really well, a part of me recognized that she was going through something horrible that she couldn't tell anyone about. There was a potential for us to share this thing. I called her on the phone one spring day and asked her what's up. We were okay friends, but not so close that I would just call her to chat. She asked me what's going on, and I said that I'd like to ask her out on a date, if she'd be interested. She said she was flattered, but she didn't think it was a good idea. And as she started apologizing, I interrupted her mid-sentence for the first time in our friendship. I told her not to worry about it, wished her a pleasant Pesach vacation, and hung up. 5 years later, she told me what that conversation looked like on her end. That her first thought was that, yeah, a date could be really nice, at least to try it out. But then she remembered that she's such an asshole. She's just a genuinely horrible person, and having a girlfriend as horrible as her would just ruin my life. And I didn't deserve that. She hung up the phone and burst into tears, something that the 15-year-old me could not have imagined. This isn't literary proof, but this is how I read this. The more obvious reading is that Brian, a guy who can pull a girl like Sophia, simply didn't even see Taylor as a potential partner. And that reading also works because it sucks for Taylor, just like calling that girl sucked for me. And reading her suffer the way I did makes me feel validated AF. Just like reading about Taylor forgetting to breathe, lapsing into caveman speech, and losing her mind every time her crush touches her. Felt more like my experience of being 15 than anything I've ever read, including my own diaries. In the actual bookstore scene, Sophia attacks Taylor. She does it unfairly, attacking from behind and causing grievous, unproportional harm. She applies pure power, but she lies to the bookstore owner so he would let her in and not interfere as she assaults Taylor. Someone commented on video number 1 that Sophia is actually wise as her name suggests. And at this point you might be tempted to think the same, but I don't think it holds. Taylor manages to push Sophia off and asks her, in what twisted perspective is it alright to stalk and attack someone because they kissed a boy? Taylor is still honoring her mother by following her single commandment, which is to try to see it from someone else's perspective. She gives Sophia the benefit of actually trusting her to have an explanation for what it is that she's doing. She gives her an opportunity to communicate it. And the thing that Sophia says is worth examining. She claims that she's justified in ruining Taylor's life because, quote, everyone has their place in life. And it's Sophia's job to remind Taylor of hers. But that contradicts the bathroom scene, where Taylor was accepting her place by eating lunch alone on the toilet, and the bullies still humiliated her even further. Humiliation comes from Latin humilis, meaning low. If Taylor was already at the lowest rung in the hierarchy, what was the point of lowering her even further? Sophia claimed that her own use of violence is justified, but that Taylor deserves to be beaten because she snitched. Pure power is legitimate and use of authority isn't. But Sophia doesn't congratulate Taylor on applying pure power in punching Emma in the face. And as soon as Brian arrives, bringing with him pure power, Sophia snitches on Taylor with some made-up offense without the slightest trace of hesitation. Sophia's philosophy, as it is presented here, has no internal logic. Its only function is to diminish Taylor's confidence in her views. I remember reading it and thinking that this is so brave to write. I witnessed a panel with brilliant sci-fi author and awesome human being Peter Watts, where somebody asked him why his books are so depressing. Peter responded that his books, in fact, aren't depressing, they're hopeful. Because even when people do horrible things in them, they have altruistic reasons. What would be depressing, he said, would be to write about a president that knowingly destroys the future of the planet just to make some money for himself and his hyper-rich friends. In a way, an antagonist like Watts's is easier on the soul, and we see them a lot, from Uchiha Itachi to Thanos. Wabo took on that pain of looking directly at evil for evil's sake. He went back to his own interactions with the shittiest people he'd ever had to experience, and conjured those memories up. When I read Sophia's monologue here, I recognized the sound of it, that feeling when someone's not only ruining your life on the outside, but they also do their best to interfere with your ability to process what's going on. That's what gaslighting is, an information attack interfering with your ability to interpret reality. And reading that being done to Taylor, or attempted to, it hurts. In a very similar way, it hurts to read a little down the road as Taylor tells Brian to just drop it when he asks if she's okay after his sister zoned her. It feels real, not like something that was made up by the author, but a reoccurring pattern taken from real life and placed under the microscope to be analyzed, developed, and most importantly, paralleled. Soon after, Cricket cuts the shit out of Gru, and when Taylor asks if he's okay, that pisses him off. Echoing what Taylor said before, he tells her to just drop it. I'm claiming this as support for my theory that he's into her. He can't even tell her that it hurts when somebody cuts into him with a blade. Do you think he'd be able to tell her that he's afraid of falling in love with her? That he's insecure about himself as a person? By defending themselves, Taylor and Brian drive each other away. Trust is knowing that someone else won't hurt you, but it's also the inverse. It's making yourself vulnerable to them to show them that you know they won't hurt you. If you drive them away, defend yourself from them, they know you don't trust them, and they stop trusting you in turn. That's a more subtle way to break trust. The more direct way is to just hurt somebody, like Coyle does to the Undersiders when he exposes the identities of Empire 88. So Cole reveals the names of Empire 88 and claims to be surprised when the members of the Empire blame Tattletale for this egregious information attack. That is not only a shitty move that breaks the unspoken rules, not to go after people's civilian identities, but he also does it in a way that risks the Undersiders and he doesn't let them know. I don't like this fight. Because Cole uses his and Dinah's powers to manipulate the odds, we get this really strange choreography where it just feels like the bad guys are not trying to kill the Undersiders. Let's look at Night, for example. Her power is that when nobody's looking at her, she turns into this monster. So when she uses a flashbang grenade to force the Undersiders to look away, it makes you feel like she's a real human being thinking about how to make the most out of her powers, which is great. But then she just trashes the dogs while she could kill the entirety of the Undersiders in like 3 seconds tops. What I do like about this scene is that it points out the strength of manipulation as a form of power, as well as the second weakness. The strength is that because manipulation is a strong uniting force, Empire 88 has a lot of parahumans and strong ones. The 2 parahumans that chose to work under Lung, namely Bakuda and Oni Lee, were volatile and uncommunicative respectively and literally. The Empire, however, has Hookwolf, who is basically 3 tons of rotating blades, Stone Tiger and Cricket that are extremely versatile and disciplined, Night and Fog that are things of terror even before they combine their powers, and about 10 more members. This makes the fight against Bakura feel like a tutorial level, but the Undersiders make it out because they recognize the second weakness of manipulation. When the people you apply authority over notice that, they still respect your authority. When the people you apply fear over notice that fear, they still fear you. Trust and dependence are the same in that regard. But when someone that you are manipulating notices that you are manipulating them, your power immediately breaks. Manipulation is the most vulnerable to information attacks. Kaiser tells the members of Empire 88 that the Undersiders exposed their identities, even though he knows it was Coil. He is manipulating them into killing the Undersiders. Purity had her trust with Kaiser broken, as we've seen in her interlude, and Tattletale finds out. When she tells Purity that it wasn't the Undersiders' fault, Purity doesn't believe Tattletale. All that's needed to convince her is a simple, who are you going to trust when your daughter is on the line? Me or Kaiser? In that single sentence, we have three perspectives. Purity's, Taylor's, who doesn't know what's going on but trusts Tattletale to figure it out, and Tattletale, who just gets a glimpse of what's going on, grasping for a way to use that in her favor, not to manipulate Purity, but to build trust with her. It's no wonder that right here Tattletale professes an understanding of Purity's worldview. As she says, whatever else you might be, Purity, you somehow, in some warped perspective, see yourself as an upstanding person. And by extending that trust, she saves the day. The Undersiders patch themselves up, recuperate, and go to talk to Coil, which leads them to meeting Dinah. Coil has lost the Undersiders' trust by putting them in harm's way, and as they arrive at his new crib, he aims to re-earn their trust in a very interesting way. He wants to prove to them that they were never actually in danger, so the trust isn't so much rebuilt as unbroken. Remember, Taylor was helpless while Storm Tiger and Hookwolf were discussing penetrating her with a wind blade, and was saved by Gru in what felt like an amazing stroke of luck. To convince her that she was actually safe would require a pretty impressive power. And Dinah is powerful enough that her power really could have assured Coil that the Undersiders will likely survive the Empire striking back. A lesser author would have just had Coil tell the Undersiders what the power is, but Walbo introduces it in the coolest way possible. One of Coil's soldiers brings Dinah over. She is described as 12 years old or so. She had dark circles under her eyes, hair that was in need of a trim. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, staring at the ground. Coil bent down and pushed the hair away from the girl's face. She looked at him, then looked away. I love how Walbo just gives you all of the information you need to piece together what's going on before the characters explain, and even more. Here, for instance, we are going to be told explicitly that Coil is holding the girl hostage, but we need to pay attention to the prose to feel how much he enjoys it. Him calling her pet is a callback to how belittled Taylor felt when Danny called her Little Owl, her mother's pet name. Names, my friends, are important. After this little warm-up, let's get to the harder puzzle. I can't believe how many reads it took me to understand this one. Coil asks Dinah what are the chances of the Undersiders coming back if he sent them to fight Kaiser. Dinah says that he already asked her before. Again, natural dialogue to let us know that this is pageantry for the Undersiders. She answers, 46% chance they all come back. He asks her what are the chances of the Undersiders returning if he uses his power to help them, and she gives them 32% chance of success, a significantly lower number. Why? Coil tells her the numbers are wrong, and she starts screaming about him not wanting to give her any candy, and he shakes her, a violent, dominating gesture. He asks her for the number again, and this time she gives him the result, 12.3%. So what the hell happened here? Dinah has a power that lets her predict outcomes, but it only predicts the outcome in a world where her predictions aren't known. The measurement affects the outcome, and the moment she speaks her predictions out, she is now in a different world, with different percentages. After she answers for the first time, she affects the Undersiders. How? They now know that Coil is holding this girl hostage for her power. He is asking for the chance that all of them return, not the chance that they win. And after realizing what he is capable of, it is unlikely that all of them will return. More accurately, it's unlikely that Taylor will return, after learning that Coil kidnapped Dinah for her power. Tattletale doesn't understand what's going on, and neither does Coil. He sends the Undersiders away, and when they are outside, Taylor explains to the rest that the girl was Dinah Elcott, that was kidnapped while they were doing the bank heist, and also that her odd behavior is her being messed up on drugs. The drugs are the purest manifestation of Coil's application of dependence as a form of power. In classic Wildbow fashion, we receive the keys to solve a puzzle way after the puzzle was introduced. The fact that the drugs are forced upon Dinah and put her in a worse situation than she was before is without question. What about the undersiders? Are they better off because of Coil's gifts? Taylor isn't. Like Adam in the Garden of Eden, she has been deceived into taking part in something evil that she would never have taken part in if she knew more. Just like Adam, the snake has manipulated her best friend to make her arrive at this decision. And like Adam was forced to leave Eden, Taylor now has left the grace of thinking of herself as a good person. Note the theme that the morality of a decision is subject to the scope of knowledge one has. Taylor would have never signed up for such a thing, except that she did. She decided to work for a mastermind supervillain. You either do evil shit for them or you help them do evil shit. Taylor loses trust with Coil for two reasons. One is that he has shown that he has the capacity not just to let the undersiders get hurt for his plan, but kidnap and enslave parahumans if he needs to. The second is more important, I think. It's because his perspective is too different from Taylor's. His morals are too different from hers. This is an element of trust that our initial formula didn't capture, even though it's really important. When getting to know people, there's something very trust-building in finding out that you have the same morals. This has two reasons. One is that you are likelier to know what they will do, because they are more likely to treat you as you would treat others. The other is that we want to help people with the same morals as us, people who will affect the world in a way that we find desirable. If someone with the same values as mine asks me for help, I'm okay with giving them resources and never seeing them again because I know these resources are going to go to a cause I believe in. Taylor realizes that Coil doesn't share her values, and he will do things that she is against. It's not about the power she's gaining anymore, it's about what she does to the world. Taylor decides to leave right away. The rest of the undersiders have varying reactions. Lisa, like Eve, is shocked by what she's done, but she still considers sticking with Coil, which is enough to shake the trust Taylor had in her. The others, though? Alec and Rachel don't really care, as expected, but the fact that Brian is okay with it shocks Taylor. She had mistaken him for honorable. Taylor and Brian argue not about whether it's okay to work for someone who's done that to Dinah. Taylor's values are clear to her. She argues with Brian about whether he's okay with working for someone who keeps this girl in a drug-fueled hell. Note, Dinah is a beautiful replication of Alec, Taylor, and Brian's traumas. In order to be used for her powers, a helpless girl is locked up where she doesn't want to be and lives under the control of an abusive man. Brian says that he's okay with it. He gives a sort of reverse effective altruism monologue about how the world is full of people we could save if we applied a tiny bit of effort, but we don't do it because we don't see them. So why care about this one? He needs to take care of his sister. The rest is commentary. And here Taylor finds the difference between heroism and trust. Both have to do with suffering for others, but the difference is in who the suffering is for. Taylor was ready to suffer to make Brockton Bay better. Brian was ready to suffer for his family and friends. In that order. Taylor is heroic while Brian is loyal. Disillusion is a beautiful word. Taylor had an illusion about who Brian was, and now that illusion is broken. This is exactly what Lisa warned Taylor about when she talked about the self-delusion that relationships require. Taylor was naive about who Brian was, about who all of them were, and now she's paying the price. She describes her own emotions as anger and betrayal. Why betrayal? Because there was an implicit element of trust in thinking that they share their values. The trust isn't broken by something that Brian did so much as by what he is, what he was all along. And so Taylor has been betrayed a third time. But that's not fair to Brian. While Taylor can just walk away, Brian is completely dependent on Coil. A part of their agreement was that Coil provided whatever documents Brian needed to become his little sister's legal guardian. Notice that dependence is the strongest of the powers, as its representative defeated all of the others. Bakudan and Lung are in the birdcage, the wards have been humiliated, Empire 88 is broken up, and the undersiders with their trust seem, at the moment, to be at the disadvantage. The main advantage of dependence as a power is how sneaky it is, which you might notice if you try to spend 24 hours without looking at your phone. Brian felt this power creeping up on him. He even said that he didn't like being dependent on Coil for getting custody over Aisha, but Lisa sort of convinced him that Coil has no reason to betray him, so it's fine. Lisa was kind of sus there. The trusting interpretation is that she's dumb. Obviously, when you are dependent on someone for something, they control you. Obviously. The distrusting interpretation... She just really wanted to keep that cushy gig with Coil. I don't like it. I don't like it that she literally tells Coil that she likes him either. Either way, Brian needs to choose which of these girls to rescue from an abusive household, a stranger, or his own sister, and he chooses his sister. And Taylor leaves. This hurts, just as she came to accept them. To leave her family and her dream to be a hero for them, she has to leave them as well. The only friends she has. The fact that she chooses to leave, the fact that she doesn't hesitate is beautiful to me. She sacrifices the most precious thing to her for her morals. At least, that's the trusting interpretation. The distrusting interpretation is that she knows that it will ruin her reputation forever to be associated with that kind of thing. That she could never be one of those villains that end up joining the heroes, that even other villains will see her as vile if they find out she was okay with the kidnapping. Either way, she leaves. The problem is that she knows a lot about the Undersiders, where they live, how they work, their faces, names, life stories. They can't just let her join another team now. So Gru makes the same mistake that Danny did, trying to grab her arm. Taylor uses the bugs as a wall between them, and Bitch makes the dogs grow. It is up to the reader to construct her perspective. She sees Brian as alpha, so when he gets aggressive, she gets aggressive. And then Taylor does the most terrifying thing I've seen her do. She thinks. I was already thinking of how I'd deal if it came down to a fight. His costume covered his skin, but I remember the vents on the edges of his mask that redirected the flow of darkness from his face to the edges, so the skull image would stand out. In a pinch, my bugs could get in that way. His power didn't really affect me, but would a slow trickle of bugs into his mask compensate for his obvious advantage in hand-to-hand fighting? Just like with a school meeting, the important part is what's not being said. No, I really don't want to beat up my crush and close friend. No, how did it come to this? She completely drops thinking about him as a human being and only thinks about him in terms of tactics. And that part terrifies me more than anything. It's the right thing to do when you think you might be attacked, but it's so inhuman. Like another part of Taylor is revealed to us. This part makes me feel like her narration in the first fight with Lung wasn't accidental. She stops being a human being and turns into this war machine. Or worse, she shows us a war machine that was under the surface the entire time. Let me tell you something personal. I've only read one suicide letter in my life, but it was very long and I've read it many times. And of all the different things written in that notebook, the idea that I go back to most often is the one that along the years I came to think of as the thought that kills. Specifically the thought that human beings, every single one of them, are machines built to win a violent and invisible war in which their own strategies and goals are invisible to them. The goal is to seek more power over other human beings, and the strategies are everything we do, including being genuinely helpful and kind. It's basically a distrusting interpretation of humankind. This is the way that a deeply traumatized person, a betrayed person, sees human beings. I still miss him. It's been 25 years and I still miss him. Anyway, if you look closely, you can see glimpses of that same thought in Worm. One such glimpse is when Taylor stops thinking about Brian as Brian and thinks of him only as Gru. Naming is a tool to divide parts of a whole. Taylor and Brian are friends. Skitter and Gru are war machines. It is a dark, terrifying thing. And the author lets us linger for just a moment before reassuring us that these are human beings again. Brian shakes himself out of it. He doesn't want to fight her. He still thinks of her as Taylor, as is evident by the fact that he lapses into using her name while in costume. He curses, which is rare for him, and tells Rachel to let her go. As ugly as it is, this is a moment of triumph for Brian. I suspect he handled this better than his own father would, and I know he handled it better than Danny did. Unlike Danny, Brian lets go even though pure power is still on his side. The thing is, once the bugs are out, if Brian wants to stop Taylor, he has to hurt her. Every time Taylor needed saving, Brian was at best late. When Sophia tore her ear half off, when Bakuda hit her with the pain bomb, when Lung was squishing her like a squeaky toy. The only person Brian can save Taylor from is himself, and he does. And she's not even a part of his team anymore. He's doing it because he likes her. And so Taylor leaves, for real this time, leaving another part of herself behind. I said at video 0 that one of the themes is the courage to let yourself die and become something else, but I may have been wrong. I don't think Taylor's really looking to change into something else. She simply tries to make the best decision at the juncture in which she is in. And if that decision demands that she kill a part of herself, so be it. I feel like that's the main difference between Taylor and Lisa. Taylor looks up to her internal principle for guidance, even when she is confused. She struggles with the right thing to do. Lisa doesn't deliberate so much. She simply knows what to do, or more importantly, what not to do, like that time when Lisa doesn't say goodbye. Taylor arrives at the loft to take her stuff, and Lisa arrives shortly after. Remember, Lisa is arguably the strongest of the Undersiders, and I think she was faking her screw-ups in order to make the rest of the team less terrified of her. Even if the screw-ups were real, she's by far the one I'd be most terrified to face. To fully understand the power of this scene, let's first recall all of the times Taylor wanted to leave and couldn't. The locker, the bathroom stall, the rooftop, the lockers where she was reminded about crying for a whole week, the school system in general, the first time she met Brian in the loft, the bank, the storage units with Bakuda, the banquet, her father, and Brian again. In all of these cases, power was applied to force her to stay. The school system let her leave but threatened her with castigation. But now Taylor is faced with the strongest, most terrifying opponent. Lisa can tear apart a stranger based on their body language. And she's been living with Taylor for a couple of weeks now. Taylor not only has 1,000 weak points to tear into, some of them she exposed willingly, but she's also freshly heartbroken to find out that she again doesn't have any friends. Taylor is faced with Emma times 1,000 while being at her most vulnerable. Lisa could literally kill her with a sentence. So what does Lisa say? This feels bad. Do you really have to go? Taylor says that she does, and Lisa simply asks her to be open to talking in the future. Even better, she says that she'll resolve the situation with Cole herself, if that means that Taylor will be willing to talk to her. Once again, what's more important is what isn't being said. Lisa concludes the philosophical argument of this arc by being the first person to extend trust to Taylor, to give her freedom. Lisa is the only one that just lets her leave. She asks Taylor to keep the line of communication open, but that's really all she does. She asks. I love her so much. Note, she doesn't share Taylor's values, I think. She's more shocked than Brian, but she's still ready to work for Coyle. She does, however, love Taylor. This is the same relation between Frodo and Sam Gamgee. Frodo cares about the world. Sam mostly cares about Frodo. The thing that Taylor wanted the most was to be trusted by someone. I talked so much about the strategic value of trust that I neglected speaking of the fact that psychologically, we need to have someone's trust in us, and to have someone to trust in. Just like how the meaning of becoming friends with the Undersiders was maximized with how Taylor was so lonely before, here, after being distrusted for so long, Lisa's trust means so much. But because the author can't let our girl have a moment to actually enjoy herself, she gets that ultimate show of trust just as she has to leave the Undersiders. So many things in this scene are beautiful. Taylor's alarm rings, as it does every day, for her to get to her morning run, showing us that the familiar pattern is broken. Taylor decides to take the amber that Brian bought her with the dragonfly inside, to show that while she says goodbye to the Undersiders themselves, she still cherishes the memory of being given something beautiful by the boy she liked. This is symbolic to the 3 gifts that the Undersiders gave her. With Lisa, it was clothes that actually look good. With Rachel, it was a jacket when she was cold after performing surgery on lung. This was their basic, very human way to extend their own trust to her. Lisa goes to the kitchen instead of walking Taylor to the door, as if this was no big deal. You can imagine what she feels, how desperate she is to hide it. What a beautiful, broken book about beautiful, broken people. Just as Taylor leaves the loft, an air horn blows, marking the end of this arc. Summary. The themes of betrayal, trauma, perspective, and trust coalesce into one grand theme. But yet they form a statement, and it goes something like this. The initial state of a human being is to trust, and the breaking of that trust is often traumatic. The person doesn't just learn that they should trust a little less, their perspective shifts, and their default interpretation of other people becomes distrusting. But they still need trust in order to thrive. How do the Undersiders deal with this? Taylor lets her new friends know about her weakest moment and volunteers to shovel dog shit. Brian and Alec get injured to protect their friends. Rachel lends a jacket. Lisa lets her favorite person in the world go, even though she could manipulate her to stay so easily. They all extend trust. Note that their challenge is double. Not only have they been traumatically betrayed themselves, but the people they are trying to build trust with have also been made to distrust. And still, they try. Should we do the same? Sometimes. You know what bothers me? Those memes about men complaining that nobody cares about them? Not because it's not true. I know a lot of people who feel that way, and many of them are men. And complaining is a useful social function when done right. The thing that bothers me is that it's unclear to whom the complaint is addressed. It's easy to interpret as a gender issue, but if a man says nobody wants to hear about my problems, that means his own male friends don't listen either. Or more accurately, that they feel like their male friends don't listen. Why not? What is stopping them from talking about what's paining them? You know what this essay is about. You know where I'm going with this. When you talk to another person about something really painful, you are making yourself vulnerable to them. When you request, however implicitly, to talk about something that's bothering you, you give the other person an opportunity to listen and empathize, but you also give them an opportunity to reject your request, to not listen. And that hurts. And opening yourself up to the possibility of being hurt is scary. This leads to a situation where many people are walking around the world with pains that their best friends don't even know about. Maybe you feel like that. Maybe your friends do, and they don't know how to tell you. How do we solve this? I don't know, but I think that the solution that Worm suggests is to be the first to extend trust. And that solution sucks because often the trust you extend won't be reciprocated. Lao Tzu, author of the Tao Te Ching, claimed to only have 3 treasures: simplicity, patience, and compassion. We need to feel that we have people that we trust. Even if you don't need anything from them, it is a deep need to know there are people who will suffer so that you will suffer less. And it's hard to get proof of that in a world that's mostly convenient. I think that one reason that friendships feel so shallow in the better part of the world is that they're not tested. When I look at my own friendships, the deepest ones are the ones that stood at tests. Friends who kept me from falling apart in high school, went with me through the gauntlet of martial arts training, or were allies in the horrifying process of writing a book for the first time. And I feel like relationships where people are just hanging out because it feels nice lack that element. As we said on the last video, there are other ways to build trust, knowing each other really well and being emotionally vulnerable with one another. But I know a lot of people who spend most of their free time with friends who never suffered for them, don't know them, and aren't vulnerable with them, and these people can't seem to figure out why they feel so lonely even though they have so many friends. I was in Spain when the lights went out. I was there with an Iranian friend, which is indeed a flex. It's how to explain how good it feels to be friends with someone from a country that your home country is at war with. You feel like you're both above the propaganda. Iranians, surprisingly, are more like Israelis than any other nationality I know. They have a really dark sense of humor, love chess, and usually hate their government. Though obviously I have a bias in my sample. So as the power died, my friend and I started thinking about how we're going to survive the next couple of days, assuming the power doesn't come back. Our Spanish friends told us that we shouldn't worry because an official notice came out that the power is going to come back in 8 hours. We looked at them like they were crazy. Who cares what the government says, we asked. This information has no value. We started looking for a place to buy dry food and water bottles while our Spanish friends went up to the roof with some beers and took a nap in the sun. I'm not making this up. After 8 hours, the power came back on. Our Spanish friends could relax because they trusted their government, or more accurately because their government was worthy of trust, mostly. My Middle Eastern friend and I couldn't relax because we came from a place where you can't trust your government. Having trust allows you to let your guard down, so it's no surprise that cultures that are very individualistic and incentive-oriented are extremely anxious despite the superficially high quality of life. Walking down the street and knowing that the reason people aren't killing you is some basic trust you share feels completely different from walking down the street and knowing the only reason they don't kill you and take your money is because an authority tells them not to, and they fear the repercussions. I feel like we gave up on trust as a social issue worth discussing, and we shouldn't have. I feel like we gave up on trust as a requirement for our leaders, and we really shouldn't have. I could keep talking about this all day. Everywhere you go, you can either see trust or how trust was replaced with one of the forms of power, and the disadvantage of that replacement. Whether on an interpersonal level or the world level, having trust is the opposite of being alone. We shouldn't be alone, not if we can help it, and I think we can. Okay, another one done. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you to my beautiful beta viewers, and a super warm, heartfelt to the point of being embarrassing thank you to anyone who left a comment about waiting for the next video or how happy they were to see the new video come out. That shit makes me so happy. I'm going to take a break from doing these for a while. I have been spending pretty much all of my free time reading Worm, analyzing Worm, and writing Worm fanfic, and it started affecting my mood exactly how you would expect. I'm going to come back to this. It is a simple fact that I don't have a choice. There is so much I want to say. I want to talk about how Leviathan and what comes after are about the horror of discovering what the world is, and subsequently how clear it becomes that God isn't there. How the S9 arc is about the horror of being transformed by other people. The Warlord arc is about love, both familial and romantic, and the control that naturally comes with that love. All the boring parts that come after are about reconciling the Jungian shadow, and the ending... I have so much to say about the ending that I've been waiting to say since reading the book for the first time. I just had to learn how to say it. Of all the ways that a person can be lonely, the inability to communicate is the one that I hate with the hottest, brightest fire. Until next time, communicate, observe without fear, shift perspectives, and extend trust, but within reason, you hear?